welcome to Comic Boom, the comics and education podcast. If you're interested in hearing more about the crossover between comics and education, then this is the podcast for you. My name is Lucy Starbuck-Bradley, and each week I'll be joined by a fellow educator, an academic, a librarian or a creator of comics to discuss their journey into comics and provide some inspiration to influence your practice. And hopefully shine some light on some titles that you can bring into your libraries, classrooms and hopefully onto your bookshelves at home too. This episode of Comic Boom is sponsored by ALCS, the Authors Licensing and Collecting Society, and is also brought to you in partnership with the Lakes International Comics Art Festival. I'm delighted to introduce our guest for this episode, Molly Ray. Molly is a Lancaster-based comic artist and illustrator. Her debut graphic novel, Giant, was published in 2024 with Faber and Faber. It is incredible. In 2019, Molly graduated from the University of Edinburgh with a first-class honours degree in illustration. Her work has been featured by Creative Boom, the AOI, and Broken Frontiers 6 to Watch in 2021. She's also done work for the BBC in support of David Attenborough's Wild Isle series and self-published multiple short-form comics. Now, way back when, in the first ever episode of Comic Boom with Gemma Sosnowski, who was then a school librarian, she's now a university librarian, Gemma spoke of one of her past pupils who was in the process of creating her first graphic novel. And it was a brilliant story, I felt, about what can happen when you have that support in school. And that pupil was, in fact, Molly Ray. And I'm delighted that this episode is a bit of a love letter to the impact that librarians can have on children and young people. Here's what Molly had to say. Hello Molly, welcome to Comic Boom.
Hi Lucy. Thank you for having me on.
I'm very excited to have you here. Can you tell me a little bit about your journey as a comics reader? Where did that all start for you?
So I was actually really interested in animation when I was younger, and it was all animation, and I'd make little plasticine animations. And then it was actually my ex-girlfriend in school when I was about 15 that got me onto the Walking Dead graphic novels.
So quite late then, to start 15, for someone who's so young, gone on to such great things.
Yeah, I was quite late to the comics and graphic novel game, but I was always interested in visual storytelling. I suppose that's why I mentioned about animation, because it definitely has played a huge role in what I'm doing now.
Do you see your work as moving images that you then put down into still images sort of in your mind?
Yeah, exactly. So it was almost like it was a brilliant medium to discover, because I can more quickly tell a story. And even then it took, 3-4 years to make Giant. But compared to animation, I could more quickly move a story that's in my mind into something that somebody could consume. So I definitely first picture it as a moving story in my head, and then it's translating that onto the page.
We kind of got into a really deep question then straight away about your visualization.
I love that.
It seems, what was it that you said, Walking Dead? That seems quite far away from Giant in terms of genre, style. What other things were you reading when you first started to explore comics?
Well, that's the funny thing, because my ex introduced me to the medium, really. Well, not introduced me. I'd obviously had there were comics around, but I'd never really got into it. But that was a genre that she liked. So then now it was well, what do I like? And then I really liked The Arrival by Sean Tan, which is so different from The Walking Dead. And I love The Walking Dead as well, just to throw that in there for the record. But it was inspires me as a creative. The illustration style and the topics and stuff, I really liked things that were about maybe topics where people had experienced something and then they were expressing it. My friend Gemma, who you've actually interviewed.
I was going to ask you about Gemma in a moment, time.
She's a legend. But she's a national treasure. But she was the librarian at my school, and she was actually a big influence in that, she would get graphic novels in for me and we would sit and chat about comics. That's how we ended up being friends, and we're still friends now. But she would order them in, and when I was a teenager in sixth form, I went through an eating disorder and I had anorexia, and I asked her to order in Lighter Than My Shadow by Katie Green. And that graphic novel, if people haven't read it, it's extraordinary. But it completely made me realise that I had a problem. It was a huge pinnacle moment in my recovery, and it also showed me the potential of comics.
Yeah.
So yeah, I was reading heavy stuff, even as a youth.
That seems much more of a sort of clear line to where you've ended up creating Giant as well. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about graphic medicine later on, but that's a really interesting theme that I want to pick up. But for now, can you tell us a little bit about what you're reading now and the kinds of things that are piquing your interest that are out there in the comics world at the moment?
Yeah, well, I feel like I'm in a world now where I'm spoiled for choice, because I'm at festivals, or I'm in when I visit the Faber offices, they just give me stuff.
Living the dream.
Living the dream, I know. They've just, here you go. So I've got piles of graphic novels, and it just feels like in the period of time that I started getting into it to now, it's just so exciting how much scope there is. It feels like a really cool time to be in comics, because there is still new stuff that there's so much to explore about what can be done with the medium. At the moment, I'm reading Blankets, which is by Craig Thompson.
It's a classic. It's a kind of seminal comics work, isn't it? Blankets. It's beautiful.
I've always meant to read it. I think it's such a feat to read it, let alone to have made it. So I suppose I was waiting for the right moment to read it, but that's knocked me sideways. I'm also reading. It's called A Journal of My Father, and it's by Jiro Taniguchi, and that's absolutely extraordinary, really beautiful and poignant. I think there is a theme. I definitely still like reading graphic novels and comics that are about people's lived experiences and how they've translated that into beautiful visual narrative.
Yeah, and that definitely comes across in your own work as well. I mean, Giant is beautiful and very powerful. Can you introduce listeners to the book? It's relatively recently released. They may not have read it yet. Can you give a little bit of a description and maybe talk about the inspiration behind it?
Yeah, so Giant is a silent graphic novel about when my brother was diagnosed with cancer, and he's all right now. I should caveat. But the main character wakes up one day to find they've physically grown to the size of a giant, and it's meant to be a metaphor for the physical mutation of cancer, but also being the elephant in the room, literally. But also the giant strength that he takes away from the experience in recovery.
I love that. And why did you make it a silent comic in particular? Does that something that just happened? Was that a deliberate kind of mechanic? How did you end up with a silent comic?
Yeah, so the first drawing that I ever did, the first thing that went on a piece of paper in relation to Giant was a sketch, and it was during my brother's treatment, and I didn't have the words to explain what was going on. I felt like it was too much to try to express. So, but I did have this image in my head of him as a giant, and we were all sat around the dinner table trying to have a normal meal. But he was literally the elephant in the room. And so I revisited that sketch when he'd got the all clear, and I felt like I could process it. But it accidentally, well, I don't know if accidentally, I think it was always meant to be silent, because it was how it started, and it was the most natural expression of what was going on for me. I then recognised quite early on the benefit of that is that it's easy to relate to and project your own experiences onto it, because it's silent and it could be anyone.
Yeah, everyone's bringing their interpretation of what they see.
Exactly.
Are there challenges as well associated? Were there times you were like, oh, I just wish I could just write a little sentence here to sum up what's happening, or yeah, is there a flip side to that?
Oh yeah.
Those days when you had your head in your hands.
Honestly, the most helpful thing that I did, though, was show it to people and then see if they could understand it. And they would go, oh, what's that, thing in the corner? And I'll be like, oh, that's quite an integral
thing.
Thing. It's quite an integral thing that you know how to read this, otherwise I can't communicate. So that was really helpful, because sometimes you know what you're trying to say, so you think that it comes across, but actually when you have no words and it's just visuals, it's so important that it is like crystal clear. So yeah, there were a few times where I would show it to people and they didn't know they were helping me by going, oh, I what is this? And I'd be like, aha, you can't read that. I need to fix that. So yeah, that was a really tricky thing to navigate, but it was really rewarding because I had to kind of let my ego go a lot and just be like, nope, okay, I didn't express that. So it was a good lesson in writing.
Did you do a lot of kind of research into other silent comics and different approaches that different creators have, or was that just something that's kind of in the background of your knowledge because you've enjoyed reading them in the past?
For example, The Arrival by Sean Tan, I always understood that it was great. I didn't understand how he was doing it, though. So I actually sat down with it and went through it, like page by page, and made notes on how he was using silent comics to convey a story. So yeah, I'm very shamelessly saying that it was a really important thing, that process.
It's really interesting. It made me think straight. Giant is very, very different, not at all similar to The Arrival, but it did make me think of it, I guess, the silent element and then also the kind of the single material used throughout.
Yes.
And also, although very different, very, very different drawing style, you use very simple forms, but very detailed kind of texturally. It brought to mind one a guest on the podcast referred to, I haven't actually seen this interview myself, but Sean Tan saying that, perhaps there were many times when he regretted his choice to do really detailed images in The Arrival. Was that your experience as well? It's very much a labour of love, it seems. Has that always been your style? How did that style come about?
I fully relate to that. So I absolutely, it was a labour of love, and I don't think I could ever do that again.
You're over it now.
In terms of I'll be doing graphic novels, but I think when every single panel is just so meticulously done, it was a lot. I really enjoyed it, but it was definitely a one-time thing. I think one of the most helpful things I ever got told at uni was stop trying to find your style and just do the stuff you enjoy and try stuff, and your style will come. And I think that's so true, because I kind of tied myself to, I am the person who does ballpoint pen stuff. And that's really limiting. So I also do stuff in colour, and I'll do it with coloured pencils, or I'll use black coloured pencils, if you will, or I'll use diamine inks or pastels or whatever it is. Or when I'm doing a mural, that's all in acrylic. And you can still tell it's mine. And I think that's the point, is that you don't have to wed yourself to one medium. So yeah, I think my next project will likely be in colour, probably coloured pencil with words. So yeah, it's exciting.
And have you actually got a project in mind at the moment? Is there something brewing?
Yeah, I've got a project in mind, but it's very early days. But I'm excited to explore something that feels very different to Giant. So yeah, we shall see.
Leaping back to our conversation about silent comics, something that people might not be as familiar with, I think The Arrival is is an amazing example. Do you have any other examples of kind of good silent comics that people listening could have a little look at as starting points if they want to explore that?
Yeah, there's Crushing by Sophie Burrows. It's a beautiful, quite simple story about people who are lonely and around each other and like could be a part of each other's lives. That's a very beautiful graphic novel, and that's in 2 colours. It's just in red and blue, and that's really, really gorgeous. The way she uses colour in that is amazing, like to draw the eye. Cormorants by Nick Hayes is a beautiful silent comic, and it's got a fold-out bit, which I love.
Oh, I'm just having a look at that. The art styles looks quite stylised. It looks cool.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. And just the way that different artists use even the silent medium is so different. You know, you'd think there would be like rules because it's already quite limiting, but actually these are all really different. Again, to The Arrival as well. Oh, and also obviously The Snowman by Raymond Briggs. Which is a classic. So, and one that people
has
would
to be mentioned.
Well, probably a lot of people probably wouldn't even think about that as a silent comic, because obviously it was put in the children's section, which is awesome. But it is also a silent comic, and it's beautiful.
Yeah, stunning. So, what were the sorts of, when you looked at that copy of The Arrival, what were the kind of takeouts? Were they too technical to kind of go into? Was there some main themes that you thought, this is really moving my understanding of the silent form, or one approach to using it and what that can look like?
I think one of the things that, can be applied to illustration more broadly as well is using, limiting how many tones you use so that you're directing the eye. Because it's almost like, if it's important in illustration, in a silent comic, it's the only way that you can communicate a narrative. It's almost even more important that you are absolutely looking at the right thing. So using limited tones and light to direct the eye, but also the different ways of progressing a story without words, by having smaller panels with sequences where it's, just they're more intimate moments, or having much larger panels or full page spreads that kind of zoom you out. So it's almost like you're following the eye of maybe a bird that's like darting
going
around
through the scene. Yeah,
which I actually
That's
did
cool.
in Giant, so that must have been subliminal. You do follow the magpie between them.
Yeah. I love that. Magpie drawings are beautiful. I find that really interesting. I love it when there's a lot of kind of that aspect to aspect, kind of just taking details of a scene and building up a kind of a sense of place without it necessarily being about driving the narrative forward. But when there's just moments to just be still in a setting in a comic.
Yeah, it's funny though, because even though it might seem to not drive the story forward, it's absolutely essential to have those moments, because you can miss stuff if you rush through a story. That was a huge thing when I was making Giant, was actually adding pages in or panels in, because you could too quickly go through it, and you need a minute to process the scene and where you're at. And my editor, Angus Cargill, just said, if you need more pages, always use more pages. And I was like, okay, let's make this book huge.
That's really interesting in terms of making your first book. I'm imagining that was a learning curve as well, that whole the publishing process side of it as well. How was that for you? Yeah,
I was really lucky, because I've had an amazing publishing experience. I've been very looked after. I also have an amazing agent, James Spackman, and I felt very supported. But it is funny, when you're doing a big project, you need those check-in moments, because otherwise you kind of on your own with it. So it was really cool. I'd finish a chapter and I'd send it to my editor. So it felt like every time I finished a chapter, I had reached a new milestone. was almost like I'd broken it up into 6 smaller comics by doing chapters. So that was really helpful. And you need milestones when it's such a big project. But yeah, they're very trusting. They kind of let me go through the motions with it, and then they would intersperse editing tips. But like, they were very trusting of my creative process. So it wasn't really until the end of like 2 years that they would offer more specific edits, because they knew that I was going to reach a lot of those conclusions myself. So that was really cool, actually. It felt like they put a lot of trust in my process.
Yeah, that sounds brilliant. Your work's been described as graphic medicine. That might be a new term to some of the people listening. Can you explain what graphic medicine is?
Yeah, so graphic medicine is using the medium to tell stories about the medical experience. And that might be taking a look almost at the experience as a whole, rather than just, this is what happens when you go through this. It could be more of a story of how the emotional effects on that as well. It's a cool phenomenon.
So is it a term that you would apply to your work?
Yeah, I would say so. I think it was always my intention to create something that somebody going through a similar experience would feel like they were understood, and maybe help them find the words for their own experience. So yeah, it very much is a medical journey, but I suppose the point being is that it's a medical journey, but it's also a emotional family journey. It focuses on the whole thing rather than just the medical aspect.
Yeah, it is about the whole family's experience of that time as well, isn't it? How much did you speak to your brother about his kind of perspective on it, or did you try and just tell the story from your own point of view?
So that's a really good question, because very early on I put together my first draft, and I showed it to my brother, and I was like, I've been doing this, and I wanted your perspective on it. And I showed my family as well, and they basically all just like gave me a massive hug and went, do it. And that was like the first draft, so it was very early. And they all kind of said, after seeing the first draft, and I suppose very luckily, like by putting a lot of trust in me, they were like, you tell the story, we trust you with this story. But also it has to be from my perspective, because I can't possibly pretend to be any of them. I can only talk about what I saw and be sympathetic and be honest from my perspective. So yeah, it's my family story and it's my brother's story, but really it's my story because it's about how I absorbed it. So I'd be interested to know what their, like if it was from their perspective, like what would stand out more on that journey. But I had to kind of go off like my truth. Otherwise it wouldn't be authentic, I suppose.
I think that's really, really interesting. And it definitely feels like authentic when you're reading it. Is that something that you hope to bring into future projects in terms of, do you think you will always, for a certain extent, be writing from your own experience?
I think that compelling stories have an element of truth that makes it believable. So having, like, interjecting truth into a story will definitely always play a part. But what I am excited about is, for example, with this new project idea of not just telling something autobiographical, but choosing how much of my experience is in there. But also it gets to be, it's not tied to a plot that already exists. Like, it can be a little bit more movable. So I mean, I'm actually really excited to approach, because it feels like a different approach already. It definitely is different project to project. Like this, if this naturally feels like it has words, which completely transforms it again. It's like a whole different thing. But then also deciding on the plot, like I actually can do that. It's not like I have to wed.
You can change it.
Exactly. It's not like I'm wedded to it being biographical. It could go anywhere.
at a talk by Gustavo Duarte at Lakes International Comics Art Festival, and he said that although his comics tend to be silent, that he starts them by writing a script. So there are actually a lot of words underneath them that you don't see, if you see what I mean. Or what was your process? Did you said you had a sketch first of all, and was that, were you just building up image at a time, or did you have sort of written notes about the structure of the story before you started? And I guess how is that going to be different in this next one that does have words in it?
It's a really good question. I feel like my process was quite haphazard. So some of it was almost writing with pictures. So just drawing the story out as it came to me as really rubbish drawings that I could understand and absolutely no one else could. But then I did like timelines for each chapter so that I could, and that might be a combination of notes and sketches if I had a particular visual in my mind that I was like, yeah, that needs to go in there. So mapped it out quite loosely and then would go in one chapter at a time and do just start roughing out thumbnails. It was almost like the process of writing notes, but with sketches.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And is that are you going to do a similar thing this time, do you think?
Yeah, so it's a good question, because I started writing it and it didn't feel very natural for me, because that's just not how I've made comics so far.
Yeah.
And I've made... But I suppose that's not true entirely. I have made comics with words, and I think the reason that I started by writing is that I had, with previous projects, started by writing. So I did Two Stones, which is a little short form comic, and that started as a poem, and then I unpacked the individual lines over the course of the panels, and then I'd take ones out that didn't need to be there anymore because of it was already saying it with the image. But that hasn't really worked so far with this new idea. So it's been a combination of, I tried writing it out and I kind of wrote out a description for each chapter. That has helped, because then I can go back to each one and go, right, okay, this is kind of ish what happens.
Yeah.
And then I might draw a little sketch that goes with each of those chapters of things that stuck out visually when I was thinking about it. And then I've got like a little tiny notebook that, would like rip out pages. And I'm just going through it in my mind and drawing it, not in panels, almost like note-taking as sketches. And I'll like dot in any words or text or speech throughout those. And now I'm hoping that I'll have to come back to you on whether or not this works. But
you can come back on when that book's done in however many years' time. You can come back onto the podcast and tell us if this was a good plan or not. It sounds very organic. Sounds very, very arty and organic. And I think it's good for you. I think it's good. A good fit.
Thank you. Yeah, that would actually be really interesting to see if I stick with this. But then I can go back through and read that and start mapping it out as panels on a page. It has been funny trying to get back into it. It was so long ago that I started the process of Giant, and it was a different project with different variables, that it has been funny, like going, right, okay, how do I do this again?
This is a special episode for Lakes International Comics Art Festival, and I know that you're quite local to that. What role did having a festival like that, not too far away, how important was that, do you think, in your development as a creator, having that kind of access?
Yeah, I was really lucky, because I went to school not like 15 minutes away from Kendal, where the festival used to be. It's now in Windermere and Bowness, which is awesome because it's like a whole comics village.
Yeah, it's brilliant.
It's really cool. But I was really lucky because Gemma introduced me to Julie, who runs the festival, and I was only like 17 at the time, and she gave me a table for free and got the local Costa, the guy from the Costa locally in Kendal, to pay to have my first comic printed to sell.
Amazing. Sponsored by Costa.
I know. Specifically Kendall Costa. Yeah, it was really cool because it made me, I don't know, it made me feel like I could do this.
Confidence building.
Yeah, it really was. So they were amazing. Like, that was such a cool experience. And then since then, they've just fired opportunities at me left, right, and centre. I've done workshops with them. I did the Wild Escape project where I made a comic and I was filmed for BBC Bite Size and going around Keswick Museum doing observational drawing, which was all in celebration of David Attenborough's Wild Owls series.
Brilliant.
That was Julie. Like, she got sent that and they were like, do you know anyone? And she sent it to me. And she's done stuff like that for me for so many years. Like, I'll always be grateful. They're taking me to the Philippines. I feel very, very privileged. And it's such a cool festival. I've met so many people, really brilliant people. And I go every year.
And what are you planning to do this year? Are you tabling again? Are you going to be speaking? What's have you got? Do you know yet what the plans are?
I don't know yet, but I know that there will be a sort of celebration of Giant in some form. But I don't actually know 100% what I'm doing at the festival, but I am going to be there.
Brilliant.
Definitely.
Well, you very kindly sent me the PDF of Giant, but I definitely do need it on my bookshelf, so maybe I'll hold off and then I can get one at the festival and you can sign it for me. That'd be good.
Thank you. Definitely will sign it.
So at the end of the podcast, I usually ask guests to give me some takeouts that maybe educators can use to influence their practice. And I really thought that it would be, obviously you can elaborate and say whatever you like, but I'm really interested in unpicking the role that having a librarian at school, passionate about comics, able to access them for you. So first of all, I'd really like to unpick just how much influence that's had on you and how important that was.
I am so unbelievably grateful that I met Gemma. Yeah, she's always, like, since I met her, been really passionate and excited about comics and about me doing comics and tried to get opportunities for me, even like in school. She took me out of lessons to things. Like, she was just, yeah, she was extremely important and still is extremely important in my confidence with comics and showing me different things and sort of opening up that world, because it's not really in any part of the curriculum. So I did English and I did art, and comics didn't really have a place. So she was my source of comics and discovering this medium. So yeah, I think just having someone like that who can offer something slightly different outside of the curriculum and is really recognises that you're passionate about it and want to drive that forward. Yeah, she's amazing, and she's like my big sister.
It's great to have someone that's that really powerful mentor, and to be able to be there as a support system as well throughout everything. It's amazing, and I think it just highlights the impact that and you're very very eloquent. You're able to express your gratitude and the impact you have. And I'm sure there's lots of other people that Gemma's influenced in her role as librarian, and likewise other librarians of the country. You don't always hear it back. So I just think it's really nice to be able to shine a light on just how impactful school librarians can be in their role.
Honestly, she's amazing. And I know for a fact that she's taken other comic artists under her wing. I actually had one of them come up to me and go, "I'm the new you." I was like, well, what? Hello, nice to meet you.
You're out. It's the next gen now.
He was like, I'm the new Molly, and I was like, hell yeah.
That is creepy.
But to be honest, I loved it. I was like, yes, that means that but she just goes on and on. Yeah, she's amazing.
Yeah. No, that's brilliant. Have you got any other takeouts that you'd like to leave educators, librarians thinking as we end the show?
I think not underestimating the power of comics in improving literacy and encouraging students to read for pleasure. You know, if kids want to read comics, they're not going to read prose if you tell them they can't read comics. You know, they're just
not going to read.
Exactly. They're just not going to read. And I'm actually not thinking of it as an inferior source of literature, storytelling, because it's.
I mean, even if you think even of a silent comic, I mean, that is a perfect example, because you can't deny the impact of narrative, character, pace, all these things that are really important parts of writing in words are there when you're telling a story in images as well. And I just feel it's so transferable. I just think it's really important not to undersell the importance of visual storytelling.
I'm nodding.
Yes.
Absolutely.
So to end the podcast, can you give us one comic or book about comics to add to our to be read piles? If we're going to add one extra book to the ever growing pile, what would you recommend that we looked at?
The comic that sprung to mind is Making Comics by Scott McCloud. Is amazing, and people probably have already got that on their pile, but it's incredible because it tells a story of how to make comics as a comic. So you can literally see what he's explaining.
That's probably the first kind of comics theory type book about comics that I read, and it blew my mind. I was hooked from then. I think that was what really made me go, this isn't just something I like reading every now and again, but this is something I'm really passionate about.
He did Understanding Comics as well, which they kind of both meld together.
Companion texts on them.
They're both incredible. Like, read them both. They're extraordinary. Really helpful if you want to make comics.
Brilliant. Thank you for that recommendation. That's a really good one. And thank you so much for coming on to the pod. You're name dropped in the first ever episode of Comic Boom, which features Gemma, who's been much discussed today. And she said, "Oh yeah," I said, "Have any of your students gone on to be creators?" She's like, "Oh yeah, there's this person called Molly, and she's got a book coming out. Hopefully she's going to have a book coming out."
Woo.
I didn't have low expectations. That's not what I'm saying. I had high expectations, but I didn't think it was going to be a work of genius that it turned out to be. So I have no right to be proud, but I feel proud. I feel proud on behalf of Gemma, and just it's great to hear that the theory works. Like, give young people comics, give them access to being creative, and they create brilliant works of art. It's a great end to that, well, not end, but it's a great next chapter to that story that Gemma was telling about what happens in her school. So thank you for being the next Jen, and thank you to the new Molly. The new Molly can come on next season.
There's probably 3 or 4 of them now, so
oh no, I have to search around for another guest again.
Oh, bless you. Thank you. My head's going to be too big to get through the door after that.
Oh, thank you. Thanks so much for coming on.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's awesome.
Thank you so much to Molly for taking the time to chat to me. I loved that episode. So much wisdom. I thoroughly recommend Giant. I'm a massive fan of silent comics and graphic medicine. To have the two combined, a beautiful, beautiful thing, and just absolutely gorgeous, really stunningly paced. You can tell, I think, from the interview that Molly is somebody with a very calming, I found it very calming and just really measured, and the story kind of unfolds in a way that I feel is really aligned with how she comes across, and is very poignant, a brilliant story, and definitely one I recommend, especially maybe if you haven't come into contact with much graphic medicine or even silent comics and you don't know much about it. A great starting point. It's a beautiful story with lots of visual metaphor in there to delve into and really spend some time looking at. What have I been reading this week? Well, I was very lucky to receive from the team at Puffin some book post, I love book post, of graphic novels that have been released this year. So they've got a new imprint called Puffin Graphics, and they sent me a selection of the titles that they've released this year. They said that this year they're focusing on bringing out American titles to the UK market, and then next year it will continue, but more focused on British creators, which is really exciting. So I can't wait to see what's coming next year as well. A few of the things that they sent me. In the news recently, we saw that Francine Pascal, who wrote the Sweet Valley High series, sadly passed away, and it was in that same week that they sent these books across to me. And in it there is a graphic novel version of Sweet Valley Twins. I haven't read these yet. I'm going to take them on holiday with me this week. And I absolutely loved Sweet Valley High when I was in primary school. That was a really big series for me. So I can't wait to have a trip down memory lane to have a look at those. They also sent 2 books from the Max Meow Cat Crusader series, which my sons, who are 7 and 10, are reading at the moment, and they're really enjoying those and enjoying drawing some of the characters. They look really accessible and fun stories. And another one that I'm looking forward to reading is Blood City Rollers, because I love a bit of roller derby. I used to play roller derby, and Roller Girl, obviously, Victoria Jameson, is a classic graphic novel, also published by Puffin. So looking forward to seeing what they add to the very niche roller derby graphic novel genre, but I'm here for it. It's made for me. So very much looking forward to reading that on my holiday too. So thank you, Puffin, for sending those through. I'll also share some of those details on social media as well. But I am on holiday next week, so I won't probably, there might be some limited posts about this episode, and I'll pick up the week after. That is it from me, but we do have a little bit more of our chat, Barbara Hayes from ALCS, our sponsor for this episode. So you may remember last week I had a little bit of an introduction with Barbara, talked about ALCS's work, and this week we're talking about the impact on AI on authors and illustrators, which I think is a really interesting and topical subject. I know that you do a lot of work in terms of, there's one of the things that I've been doing at the end of every episode is flagging to listeners the kind of education resources that are available as well. I know it's also something that you think is really important as an organisation for children and young people to have an understanding of kind of copyright, of plagiarism. That's the kind of focus of a lot of those resources. Why is that important for ALCS, and why is that something that you spend, a lot of time and energy behind, that kind of education side?
Our strapline has always been protecting and promoting authors' rights. And I think you could say at the time that the internet came out, the right of an author to monetize uses of their work was quite in jeopardy. There seemed to be a bit of a societal mind shift into, if it was on the internet, it must be free. And therefore
open
copyright, yes. So it's very important for us, because there was that attitudinal shift to everything must be free if it's on the internet. And let's face it, a lot is on the internet. We wanted to make sure that young people in particular understood the importance, especially for writers, of the importance of copyright, what can and can't be done. Copyright is an enabler, and it enables people to use those works legally for educational purposes, for enjoyment purposes as well. And we wanted to just make sure that young people who really, they don't get taught these things at school. We do have to rely on school librarians and teachers to actually want to use this. So we've tried to create resources around copyright, why it's important for writers, what you can and can't do, in very easy to understand terms. There was one in particular that really grabbed my attention, because I thought this really did get to the nub of it all. And it was a resource for a teacher in a classroom. And basically, the teacher would ask the children to write a piece that could be read out in the class. And what the teacher actually got somebody to do was take somebody else's work, read it out in the class, say it was their work, and then have the discussion about how the person whose work it actually was felt about it, how the person who took the work and claimed it as themselves felt about it. And it was a really good class discussion.
I think that that's really key, is that personalising it, like you said, that the way that teacher's brought it to life for the young people in the classroom. It's that empathy of what if it was you? Wouldn't you feel slightly different about it, about your own work?
I think it's really important important, and I think especially in this day and age when we've got artificial intelligence coming our way as well, I guess this is the next step up from the internet and how society uses words in particular. How is the next iteration of our technological evolution going to affect how we as citizens do things, but also for writers, and how their works are used. If we get to the stage where school children are using AI to do their homework, how do we make sure that writers, if their works are used, they get the credit, that people understand that they're not creating their own work from this, that they're actually using somebody else's. So I think there's a lot coming up that we need to think about. I mean, we're very keen for the government to put some rules in place and make sure that authors can be compensated for any of the use of their works in artificial intelligence, because currently the technology companies, while they're creating something that is absolutely mind-blowing in what it can do and what it will be able to do in the future. I just think we're at that nascent stage right now. We do need to think about how this changes society as well, authors in particular, as it's their works that are currently being put into these large language models. And, society will benefit from their works, but it just needs to be done in an ethical and fair way.
Yeah, I read somewhere someone making the comparison of it being like when DJs first started to kind of sample other people's music, and it took a while for the legal system and the kind of parameters around that and the idea of what is acceptable and what isn't acceptable to catch up. And we're in that stage right now at the moment where the legality around it, AI, hasn't really caught up with what's happening.
And it won't for some time. And I mean, one of the things that ALCS does is advocate for authors' rights at various levels, not only the UK government, but within Europe as well, but also at the international stage. And if it was an easy fix, somebody would have thought of the answer right now.
Yeah. Thanks so much for Barbara for joining me for these chats. The last part of Barbara's interview will be in the next episode of Comic Boom. I do think it's so interesting how AI and the dawn of AI, its rapid development, is presenting so many issues for us to deal with, so many opportunities as well. I'm not somebody who thinks it's all negative, but definitely when it comes to creative ownership, I think there are some real issues that need to be sorted out, some real work to be done to protect the rights of illustrators and writers for sure in the future. Thank you to Molly and to Barbara, of course, for joining me, and to ALCS for their sponsorship of this series of Comic Boom. We have got 2 more episodes left, 2 fantastic guests to come this season. So I really look forward to those over the next month. We will continue to have fortnightly episodes. If you would like to follow the podcast on social media, you can do that by following me on Twitter at Lucy_Bradley, and by following the podcast on Instagram at comic_boom_podcast. You can contact me directly through both of those platforms. You can also message me through the website comicboom.co.uk. There's a function where you can message the podcast on each episode on the website, so that's another way to get in touch with us. I've had a few people contacting me about coming onto the show. That is absolutely brilliant. I love that. I have recorded all the episodes for this season though, and then I will be taking a little bit of a break. So if you're thinking of throwing your name into the ring, please do, but be aware that it won't be soon. It'll probably be towards the tail end of this year or the beginning of 2025 that the next season of Comic Boom comes out. My name is Lucy Starbuck Bradley. I'm the producer and host of Comic Boom. Thanks for listening.